Welcome back to Night Chronicles. If this is your first time here, glad you found us. Come in. Let me ask you something before we begin tonight. Have you ever caught a detail that a person knew about you? Small, specific, something from inside your home or your private routine and you couldn't explain how they knew it? Not something dramatic. Just a detail, and you sat with it for a second. And then you let it go, because the alternative to letting it go was something you didn't want to think about. Tonight's stories live in that space. The moment between noticing something wrong and deciding not to press it. 7 stories tonight. They come from several places. Some of them are quiet, some of them are patient. Most of them end with a change the narrator couldn't undo. Put on your headphones if you have them. Lower the lights. Stop whatever else you're doing. Let's go. The woman across the hall. I moved into the Hangik residences in Mapo district when I was 32. 1 bedroom on the 14th floor, east-facing, which mattered to me because the morning light was how I timed my work. I am a graphic designer, freelance, and I keep unusual hours, finishing jobs at 3 or 4 a.m., sleeping until 10, starting again in the early afternoon. It is a rhythm that suits me. I had lived alone for 6 years by then. The building was relatively new, only 3 years old, and the hallway on the 14th floor still had that faint chemical smell that comes from paint and floor adhesive that hasn't fully cured. The elevator buttons still caught a little when you pressed them. The woman across the hall lived in Unit 14B. I was in 14A. I met her on the 3rd day. I was carrying groceries back from the market, 2 bags, the heavier ones, because I had bought rice and 6 or 7 cans of things, and I dropped one in the hallway. I hadn't knocked anything hard. I don't think I made much noise, but the door to 14B opened, and the woman stepped out, looked at me, and said, "Let me help you, Miss Park." I remember the moment clearly. I remember thinking, maybe she saw my name on the mailbox downstairs. Maybe someone in the building mentioned a new neighbor. Both of those things are plausible. I thanked her, took my bag, and went inside. Her name was Kwan. She was maybe 45, with short hair, cut close at the back. She had a particular stillness about her, not unfriendly, just unhurried, like someone who was accustomed to waiting for things to come to her, rather than going after them. She was pleasant in the hallway. She said hello. She asked occasionally in passing if I had enough light for my work. That line is the first thing I want you to hold on to. If I had enough light for my work. I had mentioned to her once, in the first week, that I was a designer. I had not mentioned anything about needing particular light conditions. I did need them. My east-facing windows were the entire reason I had taken the unit at the asking price, without negotiating, but I had not said so. The first time she asked it, I let it pass. The second time, about 3 weeks in, I noticed. The third time, a month after I moved in, I asked her directly, "Why do you ask about the light?" She said she just knew designers needed good light. She smiled. That was all. The second thing happened 6 weeks after I moved in. I had a deadline. Packaging designs for a food import company, the kind of work that requires 3 consecutive nights of 9 p.m. to 4 a.m. to get through the final round. I had not left the apartment in 2 days except to get coffee from the convenience store on the ground floor. My colleague Soyeon, who works in the same industry, came over on the second evening to review a draft and give me her opinion before I submitted. She arrived at about 7 p.m. We worked for just under 2 hours. When she left, she passed Kwan in the hallway. They exchanged small greetings, the kind that happen between strangers in a building, brief and polite. The following morning, Kwan knocked on my door to return a piece of mail that had been delivered to her unit by mistake. While she was standing in the doorway, she said she hoped the deadline had gone well. I called Soyeon the same afternoon and asked her directly what she had told the neighbor. Soyeon said she had only said hello, and that she was visiting a friend. She had not mentioned deadlines, packaging work, or anything else about what I did. She was certain of it. The walls in those buildings are not thick. It is possible, I told myself, that Kwan had heard us through the wall. We had discussed the deadline. We had talked about the client. If she had her ear to the wall, she would have heard enough. That is plausible. But I kept count after that. Informally, in a way I didn't want to admit to myself was a count. After that, informally, in a way I didn't want to admit to myself was a count. Over the following 5 weeks, Kwan said 3 more things that required knowledge she should not have had. Once she asked if the client had approved the final round, not whether I had submitted it, whether they had approved it, which was a detail I hadn't even announced to the client yet at the point she asked. Once she asked if I was sleeping better, at a point when I had told no one I was sleeping badly, not even Soyeon. Once she caught me leaving at 11 p.m. and said early one tonight, which at the time was genuinely early for my usual departure time, a fact no one on that floor should have known. None of these things are impossible alone. I want to be clear about that. I am describing a woman who may have heard things through a wall and who made reasonable inferences. I am describing someone whose familiarity with my routine could charitably be explained as the natural awareness of a perceptive neighbor living one door apart in a quiet building. I know that. I knew it then. It is not the reason I moved out. Soyeon visited again about 2 months after the first visit. This time it was a Saturday, nothing to do with work. We had dinner. After we ate, she asked to use the bathroom, and on her way back through the living room, she paused at the windowsill. I have photographs on the windowsill, 3 framed prints, all personal, all taken at places that matter to me. I brought them from my previous apartment. They had been on that windowsill since my second week in the unit. Soyeon looked at them for a moment. Then she said, "When did you rearrange these?" I had not rearranged them. She pointed to one. It was a photograph I had taken myself on a visit home, my grandmother's kitchen in Jeonju, white tile, a particular calendar on the wall, the window over the sink with its particular light, and on the counter, a blue ceramic bowl that my grandmother kept there, always in the same place, because she had kept it there for as long as I could remember. Soyeon said the bowl was on the wrong side. I looked at the photograph. The bowl was on the left side of the counter. In my memory, and I want to be careful here, because memory is not reliable. I know this. In my memory, the bowl always sat on the right side of the counter, near the window, because my grandmother was right-handed and liked to set it close to her dominant side when she was cooking. I told Soyeon my memory was probably wrong. I told her I would check. She said okay. But the way she said it told me she had already decided the bowl had moved. I found the original photograph 3 days later. It was still in my phone's camera roll, taken on a visit 5 years ago. I had sent it to my mother at the time, and I found the sent copy in my messages. In the original, the bowl is on the right side of the counter. In the print on my windowsill, the bowl is on the left. I work with images for a living. I know what a printing error looks like. I know what it looks like when a photograph is mirrored in production. The rest of the photograph was not mirrored. The calendar, the window, the particular lean of the overhead light, none of those were reversed. Only the bowl had moved, a single object in an otherwise unchanged frame. I did not tell Soyeon. I did not tell anyone. What I did, the following week, was go to the building management office with a question about my billing account. While I was there, I asked on the premise of idle curiosity when the tenant in 14B had moved in, before my tenancy in 14A began. 3 months. The woman at the desk checked the file and told me that the tenant in 14B had moved in approximately 2 weeks before I had. I said I thought that was interesting, because when I had done my walkthrough of 14A, I had been told that 14B was vacant and had been vacant for several months. She looked at the record again. Then she said carefully that 14A had been vacant for several months prior to my move-in. The record for 14B was clear. The tenant there had moved in 3 months before my tenancy in 14A began, 3 months. While 14A was being shown to potential renters, while I was taking the walkthrough, signing the lease, reading about the quiet 14th floor and the east-facing light and the new construction, the woman across the hall had already been living there for 3 months. I moved out 4 months after that conversation. I gave the standard notice period. I told the management office the apartment was too small for my needs. I still design, still freelance, still keep odd hours. I've not framed any personal photographs since I left that building. The prints are in a folder somewhere in my storage. I have not been back to look at the bowl. Soyeon and I still talk. The last time we had dinner, she brought up the photograph without my prompting. She said she still thinks about it sometimes. She said she has never been able to explain how the bowl moved. I told her I haven't been able to either. That's the honest answer. They count my uncle worked geological surveys in a remote settlement in the Sakha Republic, eastern Siberia, in the late 1990s. He is not someone who tells stories in the usual sense. He reports things, he gives you a sequence of facts and stops when the facts stop. The settlement had 7 permanent structures, 4 residential units, a fuel depot, a supply hut, and an operations room. Everyone who worked there knew the number, 7 structures. You could verify all of them by sight from the central clearing on a clear day. The workers had a rule that nobody formally explained. You did not count the buildings out loud after dark. During the day in reports, in survey logs, fine, but you did not stand outside at night and count them aloud. The rule had been there when the current rotation arrived, passed down from the previous team. No origin, no explanation. My uncle is practical and has no patience for what he calls imported anxiety. I told one of the other workers that afternoon. The worker looked at him for a moment and then said, "Which direction was the extra one?" He lasted about 4 weeks before he decided the rule was superstition, stood outside at approximately 10 p.m. with the sky already fully dark, and counted the structures. He counted 8. He counted again, starting from the opposite direction. Still 8. He went back inside without saying anything. In the morning, in full light, he counted again, 7. He told one of the other workers that afternoon. The worker looked at him for a moment and then said, "Which direction was the extra one?" My uncle said he thought it was northeast, past the fuel depot, in a gap of ground where nothing was built. The worker nodded. He said, "Yeah, don't count them at night." He said nothing further about it, and my uncle did not ask. He finished his contract and returned home. He never went back to that settlement. When he told me the story, years later, I asked him what he thought it was. He said he didn't think it was dangerous, exactly. He said it was patient. He said he thought it had been there a long time, and it had learned what was counted in that place. Equipment, materials, structures, and it wanted to be included in the number, the way any established presence might eventually want to be acknowledged. He said the rule was practical. You don't count things you don't want to confirm, are there? He still doesn't count buildings at night. He didn't say it like a superstition. He said it the way you would state any reasonable precaution. The threshold record I will say before I begin that I am not a person who gives weight to folk practice in my professional work. I was a regional administrative officer for 12 years in the municipality of Strumica, in the southeastern part of North Macedonia. My work was property records, boundary surveys, inheritance transfers, sale documentation. I dealt in facts that could be verified and copied and filed. The rest I left to others. In the spring of 2011, I was sent to a small village west of the regional center to verify a boundary dispute ahead of a property sale. The house had been in a family for 4 generations. The final heir, a man in his late 60s who had moved to Skopje in the 1970s and had no connection to the village beyond the property, wanted it listed and sold quickly. He met me there for the inspection. He was cooperative. He wanted it finished cleanly. The house was stone construction, old, 3 primary rooms. Structurally sound, which surprised me. The interior had been kept up better than I expected. Someone had maintained it, a neighbor perhaps, or the heir on infrequent visits. There was a practice in that region, common in houses of that age, of inscribing a protective phrase above the main door frame at the time of construction. I had documented this in many properties over the years. Usually it was a short religious or protective formula in the local dialect, carved or painted into the stone. Most of them were worn past legibility. Some had been painted over by families who found them embarrassing, or who had lost the tradition entirely. The heir told me his grandmother had kept the inscription intact. His mother had painted over it once, during renovations in the 1970s. He himself had painted over it twice since inheriting, once when he'd had the exterior whitewashed, once specifically because he wanted it gone before listing. The inscription was still fully visible. Not partially, not as a faint ghost beneath the paint. The letters were clear and clean, as if the paint above them had bubbled and separated along their exact outlines, following the incised grooves in the stone precisely. 3 coats of paint and the words read as clearly as they would have on the day they were cut. I photographed it because I photograph every structural detail. I noted it in my site log. When I mentioned it to the heir, his manner changed. He was not frightened, but he was precise in a way that told me he had thoughts about it he had decided not to share. He said the stone held the original carving and paint could not fully cover carved stone, that the inscription would always bleed through. This is accurate enough as an explanation for old carved stone. I recorded it as such. We completed the boundary verification. I took my measurements at the 4 corners of the property, checked the municipal markers against the existing survey, made notes about the drainage on the northern edge. Standard work, about 90 minutes. When we finished, the heir went to lock the front door from the inside so he could exit through the side. I was packing my survey equipment at the kitchen table. I heard him try the door once, then again. Then a pause. Then a third time, he came back into the kitchen and said, without expression, that the front door would not lock. The door had locked correctly when we arrived. I had watched him do it. The mechanism was a standard mortise lock, nothing unusual for a house of that period. I went and examined it. The bolt moved freely on the turn. The latch plate was intact, properly aligned. When I pushed the door closed, it opened again, not by force, not suddenly, but with a slow and steady pressure, as if weight were being applied from outside in a continuous, unhurried way. I braced my shoulder against it. It did not help. The door continued to move at the same steady pace until it stood open approximately 15 centimeters. There was no wind. The morning was still. I checked the frame and found nothing mechanically wrong with any part of the door. I noted it in my report as a mechanical fault requiring attention before listing. The heir said nothing further about it. He left through the side entrance. I followed. The sale went through 6 months later. I learned this from a property registry notification, which is standard procedure when a case I opened is closed. I have not been contacted about the property since, but I still have the photograph of the doorframe inscription. I have not had it translated. I have considered it several times, and decided against it each time. The form of the inscription, its placement, the structure of the lettering, the way it addresses whatever stands on the other side of the threshold. These are not things I can assess professionally. They are outside my field. What I can say, and what I have said only once before to a colleague who asked about the property, is this: the door that would not lock functioned correctly in all of its parts. There was nothing mechanically wrong with it. It simply would not stay closed after we discussed the inscription. And it opened toward the inside of the house, not toward the outside, which means whatever pressure was moving it was not coming from the wind, or from settling in the frame, or from any of the explanations I have applied to it in the years since. I keep the photograph in a folder I have not opened in 3 years. The inscription was in good condition for its age. Whoever cut it had done the work carefully. It was the kind of careful that suggests the person who made it believed it mattered. Returned detectives. I've worked salvage and surplus for 11 years, most of it at a facility outside Gary, Indiana. You get used to finding strange things in bins. You get used to not asking too many questions about where objects come from, or why somebody had them. That's the job. About 2 years ago, I found a set of keys in the returns bin by the loading dock. Small set, 3 keys on a ring, with a laminated paper tag attached, the kind you make on a label printer, white tape, black letters. The tag said, Unit 311. We don't have a Unit 311. Our facility numbers go to 290. Never had a 311. I checked the current system, checked the overflow database, checked the digital records going back to when we took over the facility in 2009. No Unit 311 anywhere. I figured someone dropped them off by mistake. Wrong facility. It happens. I put them in the lost and found box under the front counter and moved on. 3 weeks later, I was doing a deep archive pass on the physical ledgers from the original facility management, paper records, going back to the early 1980s. We do this every 2 or 3 years to make sure we have a complete documented history for liability purposes. Page 47 of the 1987 ledger. Unit 311, active rental, contract dated March of that year, tenant name, in the handwriting of whoever managed this place in 1987, Ellerman, C. My name is Carl Ellerman. I sat with that for a while. I ran through the obvious explanations. Ellerman is not a common name, but it's not impossible that another Ellerman rented a unit here 37 years ago. It could be a relative I don't know about. It could be a coincidence with someone entirely unrelated to me who happened to have the same surname and first initial. All of those are real possibilities. I went back to the lost and found box. The keys were gone. I went through everything in that box, item by item. Nothing had been removed or processed. Everything else was where it should be. The keys were not there. I have no explanation for the keys. I have no explanation for the name in the 1987 ledger. I have no explanation for the fact that the unit number on the tag matched a unit we haven't had in the living system since before I was born. I don't go into the back half of the warehouse alone after dark anymore. I'm not sure when I decided that. It wasn't a decision exactly. It was just something I found I had started doing, and when I thought about why, The honest answer was the keys and the ledger and the name. Make of that what you will. What my grandmother called it. I have to say first that I'm not sure I'm going to get this right. I have tried to tell it a few times, and I end up feeling like I am either adding things or taking things out, and I genuinely cannot tell you which anymore. I am telling you what I remember. I am telling you what it felt like. Those two things do not always match up cleanly. I grew up in Bogota. When I was 24, I went to stay with my grandmother in her village in the Boyaca foothills for 2 weeks in the dry season. She had lived there for 60 years. She was in her 80s, still in the stone house her husband had built, still cooking on the wood stove, still taking her coffee in the main room at 5 a.m. I loved that house. Stone floor, thick walls, 3 rooms, and a back courtyard. At night in that village there is no ambient light at all, and the quiet has a weight to it, a physical quality, like something is resting on the air. On the 3rd night, after dinner, I was washing up at the kitchen basin, and my grandmother was sitting in the main room behind me. The back courtyard door was closed. The village outside was quiet. I heard her call my name from the courtyard, not my nickname, my full name, the one she uses when she is being serious. I went to bed. Her voice exactly, the particular softness she has on the vowels, the slight roughness on the harder consonants from decades of smoking, the particular way she draws out my name when she is summoning me rather than asking. I know her voice as well as I know anything. I turned to go to the back door and stopped, because she was sitting in the main room. She had not moved. She was looking down at her hands. I said, "Abuela, were you calling me?" She looked up and said no. I said I heard my name from the courtyard. She said, "Go to bed." I went to bed. I lay awake for a while, but nothing else happened, and eventually I slept. The 2nd night it happened, the 4th of my stay. I was more prepared for it. I was still in bed, awake, because I had not fully slept the night before. The voice came again from the courtyard, same quality, same timbre. My full name, then a pause, then my name again, then once more, and then it stopped. I did not move from my bed. I counted my breaths. I noticed, and I want to be precise about this, because it is the detail that has stayed with me most, I noticed that the sound had no echo. We were in a stone courtyard surrounded by stone walls. A voice in that space always throws sound back at you. Whatever was calling my name was not throwing sound. It was flat, like a recording of her voice, rather than her voice itself. On the 6th night, we were both awake, sitting together in the main room after dinner. It was maybe 9 p.m., the stove still warm, the light from the overhead bulb. The voice came from the courtyard again. She heard it. I know, because I watched her face while it spoke. Her expression did not change the way a frightened person's expression changes. It changed the way a tired person's expression changes when they encounter something they recognize and do not want to deal with again. Weariness, not shock. She stood up. She walked to the courtyard door and opened it about 30 centimeters and said something in a low voice I could not hear. Then she came back, sat down, and said, "It will stop before morning." It did. The next morning I asked her what she had said. She told me to leave it. 3 days before I left, we were sitting after dinner again. In that same room, she said something that seemed to come from nowhere. She said, "It used your mother's name last time." I asked what she meant. She said, "It learns the family. It starts with the youngest, and it works back." She would not say anything further. I asked what it was. She said there was a name for it in the village, but that saying the name served no purpose. I have thought about that a great deal since then. She did not say that saying the name was dangerous. She said it served no purpose, which suggests she knew the name, but had decided the name did not help. She died 2 years after that visit. I was with her at the end. She did not mention it again. The thing I have not said before to anyone is this. On the last night I was there, after midnight, I heard the voice once more. It did not call my name. It called the name of my grandmother's older sister, who died in 1981, 40 years before I visited. A name I had seen once in a family photograph caption. A name my grandmother, to my knowledge, had not spoken aloud in years. I do not know how it would know that name. I did not get out of bed. I pulled the blanket up, and I stayed still until the light came. I think that was correct. I think not answering was the right thing to do. I am not completely sure. 9 consecutive nights, This is going to sound like a clerical error. I need you to understand that I am a nurse with 8 years of clinical experience. I have filled out more incident reports and shift logs than I can count, and I know what a clerical error looks like. This was not a clerical error. I started overnight shifts at a small private inpatient facility outside Nagoya last spring. The facility has 42 beds across 3 wards. My ward, Ward 3, has 12 beds, rooms 1 through 12. On a standard overnight, the census is between 6 and 8 patients. I do rounds at midnight, at 3 a.m., and at 6 a.m., and I log each round in the ward system using my staff credentials. About 3 weeks into my overnight rotation, I was doing my 3 a.m. round when the call system flagged a request from Room 7. Room 7 was listed as occupied in the census, patient name, Fujita, but when I had done my midnight round, Room 7 had been empty. No chart on the door holder, bed flat and made. I had noted the discrepancy in my midnight log, because an occupied census listing with no corresponding chart is the kind of thing you document. I went to Room 7 anyway, because the call system does not distinguish between chart status and occupancy when it flags. I knocked. I opened the door. The bed was indented. Not a full impression, not as if someone had slept there, but the particular shallow depression that forms when weight has rested on a made bed and recently been removed. There were items on the bedside table. A magazine, a comb, a plastic cup of water. The water was full, fresh. Condensation on the outside of the cup, no patient. The room was empty. I want to be precise about the items because they are the detail that cannot be explained away. The magazine was a home interiors publication. The date printed on the spine was March 2003. Not worn or yellowed the way you would expect from a 20-year-old magazine. The cover was clean, slightly faded, the pages intact. Old enough that it should not have been in circulation in a facility intake process at any point in recent history. The comb had a small round sticker on the handle. Patient property labels. Round, white, a handwritten number in ink. Number 047. During my facility orientation, I had been given access to the property management log to understand the labeling system. I had looked through it briefly. I remembered 0047 because of the notation beside it. The number had been assigned to a patient named Hayashi, who had been on Ward 3 and had died there in 2009. 14 years before I was hired, I took a photograph of the room on my personal phone. Then I returned to the nursing station, logged the discrepancy, room contents, absent chart, confirmed empty on occupancy check, and opened the call log to note the 3 a.m. entry. The call log showed a response entry for Room 7 at 3 a.m. for each of the previous 8 nights. Each entry showed the call received, the call answered, and the response logged as resolved. Each entry was initialed by the responding nurse. The initials were mine. I want to be very clear about the timeline. I had been at the facility for 5 weeks total. The first 3 weeks I worked day shifts. I transferred to nights 3 weeks prior to this moment. In 3 weeks of overnight shifts, I had worked 7 shifts. There were 8 entries, 7 shifts and 8 entries in the log, each one carrying my credentials and my initials, going back further than my first overnight shift. I went to the ward supervisor at morning handover. She reviewed the log with me. She confirmed that the entries were in the system with valid timestamps and were recorded under active staff credentials, my credentials. She said the system did not permit false entries under a live staff login. She said she had no explanation for the additional entry. She had Room 7 cleared and the items removed. They were logged as found property and set aside for disposal or tracing. I asked specifically about the comb label. She said property numbers were sometimes reissued over the years. She did not say it with confidence. I checked the property log myself the following week. Number 0047 has not been reissued. There is a notation in red ink beside the original assignment entry that I had not noticed during orientation. The notation says, "Do not reassign." No date on the notation. No name. Room 7 has been on the vacant census for 6 weeks now. The call system has not flagged it since the items were removed. I still work the overnight rotation. I still do my 3 a.m. round. But I have started initialing the round log before I begin, rather than after, recording the round as completed before I walk it. I began doing this without consciously deciding to. I noticed one morning, looking back through my entries, that I had been doing it for about 2 weeks. I do not know what it changes. Seven at the field. I was 14 the summer, I stayed with my uncle at his homestead near the Rift Valley in Kenya. He grows maize on a flat piece of land east of the main road. The homestead is 3 structures: the main house, a storage building, a cooking shelter, and behind everything is the field, and beyond the field is open scrub that goes for a long way without changing. In the evenings the light goes slowly in that place. There is about 20 minutes before dark, where everything flattens out to the same gray-orange, and things at a distance become silhouettes. The first evening I was there, I saw a figure standing at the edge of the maize field, just standing, facing the house. I asked my uncle who it was. He said nobody. He said come inside and help with dinner. Second evening, the same figure. Same position, same stillness. I counted to make sure it was one. It was one. Third and fourth evening, one figure. I stopped asking. Fifth evening, 3. Sixth evening, 5. Seventh evening I counted 7. My uncle had come out to call me in for dinner, and he was standing behind me when I finished the count. I knew he had seen them too because he went very quiet, in a way I had not seen from him before. He put his hand on my shoulder and said quietly, "We go inside now." Inside, I asked him what 7 meant. He was quiet for a moment before he answered. Then he said, 6 means they are watching. 7 means one of them has decided to come back. I asked, come back as what? He said he did not know. He said it had not happened on this land in his lifetime. He did not say whether that was a long time or a short time in terms of what it meant. We went inside and he bolted the door. He did not explain further, and I did not push him. In the morning, the field edge was clear. The figures did not appear again during my stay. My uncle does not speak about it. When I brought it up years later, he said only, count carefully, and stop at 6. I think about the 7th one sometimes, the one that had made a decision. I think about the fact that decisions imply something that does the deciding, something that had been watching and weighing and had finally arrived at a conclusion. I wonder if it found what it was looking for. 7 tonight. That's enough for one sitting. I want to check in with you for a second. The one that stayed with me this time is the grandmother in Colombia. The part where she says it learns the family, and it starts with the youngest and works back. I've been thinking about that ever since I wrote it down. You all right? Some of those had weight to them. If something from tonight is still sitting with you, that's all right. That means it found the right person. Sleep well. And if you hear something outside that sounds exactly like someone you love, take a breath before you answer. Night.